again, I want to thank you all for coming, and I'll turn the program over to Janet, who will introduce our speakers.
Well, we are very fortunate to have two members of the staff of the Transportation Agency for Monterey County. One of our speakers, Rich Deal, is eminent for being the major designer of the Holman Highway interchange roundabout, which has been so successful. Rich is a principal engineer and for the Transportation Agency for Monterey County. Grant Leonard, who will be doing the presentation, is a transportation planner for the agency, and he specializes in highway planning, motorist assistance, and construction-related public outreach. He managed development of the Highway 68 Corridor Plan and currently manages the San Miguel Canyon Road Corridor Plan in North Monterey County and the County Regional Transportation Plan of 2018. He will be doing the presentation on the plan for Highway 68, which envisions a number of roundabouts, plus some very creative ways to deal with our wildlife habitat and wildlife in the area. So Grant will do the presentation, and then we'll have questions afterwards, and both Rich and Grant will be available to respond to questions. So Grant?
Well, good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? All righty. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to be presenting. I've attended several of your meetings in the past, and it's now my time to shine up here on camera, so I appreciate that. So I will be giving an overview of the Highway 68 Scenic Highway Plan that was conducted from December of 2015 through August of 2017. And we should be moving into some environmental review for the plan following this fall, actually, but I'll get into that a little later. So I'll cut to the chase. This is where we ended up. This is a graphic of the preferred concept. In general, it looks at replacing a majority of the signals on Highway 68 between Salinas and Monterey with roundabouts. And so those blue dots and red dots are proposed wildlife undercrossings along the highway. The way this was funded was through a Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning grant. And in addition to improving the roadway for us, the travelers, we also had to find a way to improve it for the natural environment. Since Highway 68 borders the Fort Ord National Monument and the Sierra de Salinas Mountains, on the other side there's a lot of wildlife that cross in between the two and over the highway, and that can be a problem for the wildlife, it can be a problem for us, the drivers. It's quite a serious incident if you ever run into a deer or a mountain lion. So it's a safety issue as well as an environmental issue. And what we found is that there were opportunities to put in undercrossings for wildlife to cross. And I'll get into that in a little bit as well. So a few other points about this. We were working on a corridor that involves an airport, a nationally known, world-renowned racetrack, several schools, and several proposed developments as well. So we had to coordinate our efforts with all the other planning efforts that were going on, including an update to the airport's master plan, as well as to the Farini Ranch subdivision near Toro Park, which has been approved by the county and has an approved transportation mitigation plan, but is also in court and is being litigated by, I think, two parties. And so we were planning coordination with litigation, which is an interesting, interesting process to go through. But our final plan respects the approved and adopted plan by the County of Monterey for Farini Ranch, and it also considers some additional widening for Highway 68 between San Venancio and Corral. That's to be studied later on in the environmental document. But essentially, Corral and San Venancio are so close to each other, and it's not too long of a distance that you could widen between that, and it might help the function of the two roundabouts there. Also, Laguna Seca Racetrack was very interested in improving their access. Currently, they're not at Laurellis Grade. They're just a little west of Laurellis Grade, and they have to use South Boundary Road to get in and out a lot for the major events. So if we could find a way to improve access for them, they would greatly appreciate it, as would the SPCA on the other side of the road. And the total cost for our proposed plan was $81 million. A quick note on funding. In 2016, our agency successfully passed a sales tax measure. It's 3/8 of a penny, and it will fund transportation in Monterey County to the tune of about $20 million a year for 30 years, so $600 million. Of that, $50 million was dedicated to this section of Highway 68. So we have a dedicated funding source to work with to chip away at that $80 million estimate. The other big thing that happened in 2017, as we were wrapping up our project, is the state passed a gas tax, diesel tax increase, among other fee increases, generally called Senate Bill 1, Rebuilding California. And that generates $5 billion a year for transportation throughout the state, and we can use our local funds to go after competitive grants through that state program. And so these are the two main funding sources we're looking at for Highway 68. A bit of note on process. I'm a planner, so my only product I produce is process. And these are some of the processes we went through. We looked at the intersections along the road. We looked at the segments of road between the intersections. We evaluate how those two function independently and how they evaluate or function together. Multimodal operations, that means bicyclists and pedestrians. It's a very popular route for road cyclists, not so much for the casual commuter or the family, but there's a dedicated biking community in Monterey County that uses the road. And also some potential for pedestrians at the intersections, particularly crossing the road, say, to get to the bus stops. We looked at safety and how reliable the road is. One of the key takeaways from the study is that it's a very unreliable road. It's one lane in each direction, and if there's an accident, then the whole thing gets gummed up. Or if a traffic light goes out, then everybody's stopped. And that may happen one day, it may not happen the next. So a commute for you might take 40 minutes one day, it might take an hour and a half the next. It's very unreliable, and that's not what we like to see in our roads. It's also hard to get quality bus service on a road that's not reliable, because if the bus is supposed to show up at 10 a.m. and they can't rely on it being there at 10 a.m., then they can't provide that service. We also looked at reducing emissions, getting a better air quality for the highway. Generally speaking, congestion leads to more idling and more stopping and going, and that causes more emissions to be emitted into the environment. A general performance summary, and of course our wildlife connectivity analysis. And I do have a few slides on that. We also did 2 rounds of public outreach, so in the spring of 2016 and then in the summer of 2017, first to sort of gauge what people thought were the problems with the road. We had a website and a map, and people could literally drop a comment on the map for where they saw an issue. And we used that to inform our technical work and then come up with our proposed solutions. And then the second round of outreach was on those proposed solutions. So we came up with 3 concepts that we thought were reasonable, that were fundable, and that could be built in the near term, 5 to 10 years. We wanted to have a study that could be implemented quickly and not just sit on a shelf. So the first concept was just roundabouts, improving those intersections. Second one was roundabouts with about 6 miles of widening, but in different segments. So instead of widening the whole road, we looked at a few choice segments that could be reasonably built within our budget and also would have a limited environmental impact compared to widening the whole road. And the third one was to improve the existing signals through the use of an adaptive signal system, which is a fancy term for a computer system that gets the signals to talk to each other and proactively react to traffic. And so one light will talk to the next light, and that light will talk to the next light, and then they can sort of meter the flow of traffic a little better. And we compared these on some very basic ideas: safety, which one's going to improve the road most for safety, which is going to reduce delay the most, what's going to have the least environmental impact, how are you going to operate and maintain the road over the next 20, 30, 50 years. There's a cost to maintaining whatever you build, so we have to consider that. Cost to build it, and then how the public generally reacted to the concepts when we did our public outreach. And so traditional color scheme: green is good, red is bad, yellow's in the middle. You can see the first option had the most green, best results for safety, the environment, operation, and public output or input. The widening had a little better results for delay, just because there was more road lanes for people to travel, so they could save a little bit of more time. But it was considerably more of an impact to the environment and to the cost to build it and to maintain it. And really the only advantage of the third option was the cost. It was the lowest cost of all, but signals are expensive to maintain and to operate over the long term, and we also had to widen out some of the intersections to make the improved signal system work, so there were environmental impacts and also some cost implications to that. So the cost was not considerably less than the first option. It was less, though. This is a graph that shows delay. So if you're traveling from Salinas to Monterey or vice versa, how long are you expected to be in delay during the commute times? So in the morning, 7 a.m. to 9, in the evening, 3 p.m. to 7. The gray bar here shows what the existing delay is for people. And this one, the second line, shows what improving the signals would do. And the third option was our preferred choice of the roundabouts. So it was pretty clear cut that it would not only improve what it is today, but it would be better than the other options as well. Some of the concepts that we looked at but were not selected for more study was the four-door bypass. This would be a new 4-lane highway through Fort Ord from Toro Park to the Canyon Del Rey interchange. And Caltrans had originally requested a portion of the Fort Ord be set aside for this when it was decommissioned. But the land was never deeded to Caltrans. It was just a plan line. No land was officially transferred. So in 2012, when it became a national monument, that plan line became a crown gem for our national monument system, and it's very hard to build a new freeway through a national monument. Full widening, you could imagine the cost of widening from Highway 1 to where it's currently 4 lanes at Canyon Del Rey with all the homes, and then likewise from York Road all the way to Toro Park. It's quite a bit of an impact, quite a bit of expense, quite a bit of anticipated public opposition as well. A reversible lane is the idea of putting 1/3 lane down the middle of the road, and it changes with commute traffic. That has a lot of operational costs to maintain that and to operate it every day for the road. You also need a considerable split in the daily traffic, somewhere around 70% this way and 30% that way. And what we saw on Highway 68 is it was closer to 45, 55. And so although it seems like it's a profound split when you're in traffic, the numbers just didn't pan out to show that. So it wasn't a feasible alternative to pursue further. The last three are, again, large infrastructure improvements. They would have, the first one and the second one would be a bypass from Toro Park to Corral de Tierra, would also encroach on the National Monument and would have one small interchange or up to 2 small interchanges to make it work, with the existing Highway 68 being a frontage road. Again, budget-wise, those interchanges would be more than what's feasible. It would also be just one section of the road would be improved. The rest of the road towards Monterey would not. And you do have environmental considerations and the Fort Ord National Monument. And the third one was just to have every signal that's out there now be converted into a small interchange similar to the parkway schemes you see in New York or New Jersey. Again, the idea of 10 new small interchanges on Highway 68 was not feasible to pursue, But we did recognize them, we did document them.
Would you clarify that?
So it would, traveling down Highway 68, you would have no stops, but you would have off-ramps, and then you'd go under or over, and then you'd access Corral or San Venancio or Laureles. So it would help for throughput, no question. It's just a matter of the cost of building that number of interchanges, and you also get into the consideration of the character of the road. What would that do to the Highway 68 that we have now? It would be a big change. So for wildlife connections, this is a deer taking a selfie. This is actually across from the golf course near Boots Road, and it is at 7:15 in the morning on a commute day, and he's out grazing, and if he were to decide to cross the road, it would be a very unfortunate thing for him and for all the commuters that morning. And this happened at what we called our hotspot for animal collisions. We noted an unusually high amount of fatalities for deer and car accidents with animals at that location. And it just so happens it's on top of a drainage culvert that the water flows through, and the deer like to follow water. And so they all come to this location, but the pipe is too small and too full of dirt for the deer to go through. And so they then go up and over the road. So if that pipe were improved, they could simply cross under it. And the idea behind that is something like this. This is from Colorado. This is also very similar to the Toro Creek undercrossing at San Venancio. So as you leave San Venancio towards Salinas, you actually go over a bridge that looks a lot like this. And if you go under it, you'll see a lot of wildlife tracks, and our camera captured a lot of wildlife going under that road. So that's a good example of where the animals had a safe way to get across the road compared to our hotspot. So we wanted to install a variety of improvements, this being the largest type along the corridor at 10 different locations. Some of them would just be this type of directional fencing that could guide the animals to where there's already a pipe big enough for them to go through. Other locations would be a bigger pipe like this. But the big thing we got was, why so many roundabouts? Aren't 9 or 10 in a row? Isn't that a little excessive? You know, did you guys have a discount in bulk prices? Well, one thing to keep in mind is it is a series of signalized intersections, right? And so the traffic lights control traffic and allow you to go this way or that way. And we all wait our turn politely, and then we go forward. That also leads to a lot of people not paying attention and crashing into the car that stopped at the light in front of them. You have a lot of rear-end accidents on Highway 68. You also have just a lot of congestion that results from that. So if you take the idea that we're just controlling traffic as it already is controlled, the roundabout is just a different way of controlling it. A way that has been endorsed for a number of reasons, including safety and emission benefits. The Federal Highway Administration has endorsed it, as has Caltrans. Caltrans actually mandates that you consider a roundabout option whenever you're looking at improving one of their intersections. It's widely used in other states and in California. It's been endorsed by the American Association of Retired People and AAA. And this last really acronymy one is our technical workbook that we go to when we do traffic analysis. And that is the technical world that Rich and I live in have also endorsed it. So nationwide, over 4,000 roundabout intersections so far. This is from a consultant website. You can visit this and you can zoom in on the individual locations, and Holman Highway is on the map, as is the roundabouts in Marina. But you see they work in Wisconsin where it's snowy, they work in Florida where it's not. They work in Washington and Kansas and Colorado, and actually California is in the top 10 states in terms of total number of roundabouts. And then they're peppered up and down the East Coast. So perhaps it's new to us, but it's not a new technology or a new way of monitoring traffic. I talked briefly about safety, but in general, overall collisions will go down 40% is what's been noted nationally. Injury collisions go down by 75% and fatalities by 90%. Again, that's from those 4,000 intersections that have been studied. And then pedestrian collisions go down by about 40%. So this is a dramatic improvement for safety. We had some concern about emergency vehicles on Highway 68. There is a fire station at Toro Park and Laurelis Grade. It's the main route for residents who live there to get to Community Hospital or to Salinas Valley. And what we like to show about this picture is it's a fire station at an intersection where the driveway of the fire station actually enters the roundabout. And this is in Chico, Northern California. And on a previous version of this, we had a quote from the fire chief talking about how easy it is for his trucks to come in and out, even during commute time. Also of note is the roundabout is 2 lanes all around, which is the same style of roundabout we're proposing for 68. So if there's traffic, they can move to the right or to the left, they can clear a lane, and that allows an emergency vehicle to go through the intersection quite quickly. If you happened to be in traffic last week on Highway 68, one of the reasons on one of the days was that one of the traffic lights went out. It malfunctioned. And when that happens, it blinks red and it acts like a stop sign. The same for when the power goes out. But in the case of a roundabout, there is not that electrical reliance. There's not that potential for a malfunction. So that you get a more reliable road by taking out that potential. And we have a simulation for Highway 68 at 218 Canyon Del Rey.
This is an interesting intersection because I rebuilt this as a traffic signal when I widened Highway 68 and put in the Ragsdale signal. And we did it to serve traffic all the way till 2020. Well, here we are, 2018. Isn't that funny? But it was designed to move more traffic, and the way a signal does that is you add more lanes. Well, I added a half mile of 4-lane widening in order to make this signal and the Ragsdale signal work. This roundabout solution works and serves more traffic than the existing traffic signal does. And it's one of the harder concepts to get, but why do you move more traffic in a roundabout than a traffic signal? Well, the roundabout doesn't stop everyone. You don't share this teeny little box in the middle of the intersection in a roundabout, but you do in a traffic circle or traffic signal. And that's why everybody has to take turns, because there's that little teeny space in the middle that everybody has to basically drive over. You can see the space here, all the oil spots and everything, that's where everybody has to. Well, if you take out that spot, then now people blend into the roundabout, which has a larger circulatory length and area, so people blend in. The other piece that makes the volume work better or increases the capacity is in a roundabout, people are driving slower, 20 miles an hour. Just like the roundabout you went through at Holman Highway, it's designed to slow every car down to about 20 miles an hour on entry, which is about the same speed as the circulating traffic. That means everybody's going the same speed, slow. They're not stopped or accelerating, which seems to be the two things at a traffic signal, right? You got a red light, and you're driving up to the back of the queue, and you stop. The light turns green, and you accelerate. What happens when the light turns yellow? You accelerate more, right? You're trying to get through. So that speed differential is one of the things that makes safety at a traffic signal so precarious. And I've been doing traffic engineering for 33 years. And the day I started, there was all kinds of discussions in the industry of how do we make the yellow interval the right length? How do you make that yellow long enough so you can get through before it turns red, but short enough so that 4 people behind you don't go through right behind you? And it's never changed. The discussions have gone on and on and on to where, that yellow interval is measured in tenths of a second, right? Does it make any difference? No. My kids, I love my kids dearly. They'll follow the 5th car through, right? So why would you want the highest speed through the intersection to be the place where you have the highest probability of cross traffic driving right in front of you? That's why the accidents drop with roundabouts, because we're bringing everybody to the same speed, slow, and everybody's blending in and moving. Roundabouts are used much more frequently in Europe, and they've had success with them forever and ever and ever and ever. Although the roundabout technology has advanced dramatically in the last 10 years. So one of the things that has made roundabouts work a lot better lately is these splitter islands. So they're designed to essentially deflect traffic ahead of the intersection so you drive slower. It's not a dramatic thing, but it's soft and gentle, and it feels comfortable to drive slower on your approach. So we get slower speeds as we're driving in, and it's more comfortable, just like the splitter islands we have on Holman Highway. By dropping this speed, when you get to this place here, you really are only going 20 miles an hour, and the circulating speed is 20 miles an hour, so you're choosing between one conflict right there. You look left, is it clear? Yes, enter. Is it no? Yield, going behind them. Wait 2 cars, wait 3 cars, going behind them. And because the interaction is smooth and simple, and it's really driver to driver, you know, you look and you see, and sometimes you'll make eye contact. Well, that driver to driver interaction on the cross street doesn't happen at a traffic signal, does it? No, what you see is this blur. So that's what makes this so much safer. It's this interaction right here, this guy and this guy. Am I going to go in ahead of him or behind him? What happens if there's a little confusion and the guy in the center stops? It's okay. You know, maybe you burn a couple of seconds. It's all right. You didn't wreck your car, right? You just keep going. It's okay. Okay, so that's one of the key pieces. The second piece is this is really a 2-lane rural highway. It's a 2-lane rural highway. When you take a single approach lane and you split it into 2 and give them the opportunity to glide through slowly, you have more capacity. It's like you make the pipe bigger at the intersection. So essentially, it's opposite from traffic signals on a 2-lane rural highway. If I want to increase the capacity of the signal, I have to add more and more through lanes. Here, well, you can just visualize it. Here, the node is wide and the roads are narrow. With the signals, it's opposite. The roads are wide and the nodes are narrow. It's much different. I actually use less pavement with a roundabout that has the same capacity as a signal, because the signal has to have lots and lots of acreage for storing cars before they get their green and yellow and all that other stuff. So this is a photo before we finished building that roundabout. This is before we built the roundabout. And
Is that your car, Janet?
right there. But, you know, raise your hand if you got stuck in that 1-mile queue coming out of Pacific Grove. Remember how horrible that was? How frustrating? Remember that one guy that would zip in front of you coming out of Carmel Hills Professional Center? Wouldn't wait his turn? That's gone. There used to be this 12 to 15 car queue inside the Carmel Hills Professional Center. Now there's no queue. No queue. Here's the roundabout running. The volume is the same. It actually increased slightly because we got some diversion from Lighthouse Avenue. But the volume's the same as what it was in the traffic signal. It's the exact same volume. High ramp exit volume. Lots of folks coming out of Pebble Beach. Here's Pebble Beach down here. Here's the southbound exit ramp. Everybody going toward the hospital. And here's that long 1-mile queue, where it used to be, coming out of Pacific Grove. And it's just gone. Everybody's driving 20. It's smooth. It's intuitive. It makes sense. So as we look at this solution applied toward each signal on Highway 68, the question is, which signal do you like on Highway 68 that you want to keep and don't want to do this, right? Which one do you want to keep? Because we got a lot to build. We're happy to keep the ones that you like and only do the ones where we really need them. Yes, ma'am.
I heard Mary Adams speak recently, and she said that the county was thinking about putting a roundabout at the intersection of Carmel Valley Road and Morellis Grade.
Yes.
To me, I can understand your point, your reasoning here, but to me, it's not an ongoing problem. If you had those smart stoplights, it would be green most of the time on Carmel Valley Road, and then when there was a backup on the grade, it would turn. And so that, to me, doesn't sound like a logical solution to that problem.
How fast is Carmel Valley Road?
45, 55?
How fast do you really drive it? Okay. 45 to 55. Okay, good. I like you guys. You drive nice. So a roundabout is just a different way to control the same intersection. Roundabouts do not apply to every single intersection. It's not something where you take it and go, oh, we're just going to do roundabouts from now on forever. However, when you have higher speed applications where there's a lot of left turns from a side street, like Lorellis Grade, roundabouts tend to be far safer because of the speed and everything else. But you're not completely stopping the flow on the major street, which generates the queuing, right? You're blending. So could it work at Lorellis Grade? A roundabout could work at Lorellis Grade. Would a signal work there? Yeah, I can make a signal work there. By the way, I started out as a signal designer. I designed over 600 traffic signals all over the place, everywhere. LA, Orange County, Ventura, San Bernardino, San Diego, everywhere. And I've done a lot of them in Monterey. So I know how to make them work. And yes, you could do a signal at Lorellis Grade. Would it be the best option? I'm not sure. That's one of the reasons Caltrans now requires an intersection control evaluation, because it compares a traffic signal to a roundabout at each specific location. So before that roundabout is really approved at Lorellis and Carmel Valley Road, the county will do an intersection control evaluation that will really compare those and see which one works better. A great example of locations where roundabouts don't work so well. Downtown Monterey, right in front of the conference center. I just got done doing that signal there and the one at Del Monte Pacific. And the pedestrian volume is so high that essentially that intersection would just be gridlocked with pedestrians just because it's so high. So the signal does a better job of assigning right-of-way, protecting the pedestrians, and moving traffic. Yes, ma'am.
See, there are crosswalks marked there. I've never yet seen anyone walking it, but I'm very worried that someone might. How will I know that there's going to be a pedestrian crossing in front of me?
Well, that's the other good thing. And I have seen pedestrians here. During construction, there was a couple homeless guys that needed to get medicine up at the hospital. So they were walking through. But these were very deliberately designed so that on the approach, you can see this car crossing this crosswalk. On the approach, the yield condition where the driver is going to make contact with the conflicting movement here is after the crosswalk. So we drop the speed before the crosswalk, and then the control is after, the decision is after. The driver's only looking at one conflict at a time. First you see the crosswalk and the pedestrian, then you get to the yield point and you can make that interaction. What happens at a signal? It's all right there. Two different crosswalks, cross traffic, everything is right there. There's actually 32 conflict points in a traffic signalized intersection, which is interesting.
So just two more slides. This one's about public attitude. So the dark green on the left is very negative, and also before a roundabout is built. People are skeptical, they're hesitant, they don't tend to like it. And then the lighter green on the right-hand side is positive and very positive, and you see it's polar opposite. And that, again, is from our national surveys from those 4,000 roundabouts we talked about, and I think we've relived this graph right here on the Monterey Peninsula with the Holman Highway project, where people were skeptical, and now it's getting all positive reviews. So next steps, and I promise we do have the same video after this, so we can keep watching traffic. In August, we approved our plan, and in January, Caltrans essentially revalidated it through their own process, and they did what's called a project study report and a project initiation document, and that allowed it to move into the next phase, which is getting funding from the California State Transportation Commission. So Caltrans and TAMC worked with the CTC to get the money here. Throw some acronyms at you. And that funding allocation happened in March last month, and that means that in the new fiscal year we'll have our funding to go out and do our initial design work and our initial environmental document. And the environmental impact report is another chance to have more public input, more comments, and a much more detailed analysis than our planning level study was. And when that's done in 2 to 3 year time frame, it's a big document, it's a big road to tackle. We could start collecting, or rather start construction, because during this whole time we're collecting our revenue from TAMC's Measure X and also Senate Bill 1. So while we're doing our studies, we're collecting our pennies, and then we should be good to go for construction in a couple of years. And with that, we can take questions, and we can have the video going too.
I'll come around with the microphone so it's on our recording.
Hello, I like the turnabout, but is there any criteria which governs how close two roundabouts could be? Because I see on Highway 68, we have Correo de Tierra, we have San Benicio. They are very, very close. And anyway, that's the question. Is there a criteria that governs it?
That's a great question. And actually, if you notice the roundabout up at Holman Highway, there's a teardrop, which started out as a little mini roundabout, but there's a teardrop right at the Pebble Beach entrance. And that serves as the same purpose of slowing traffic down, creates the same yield condition, and that roundabout's 80 feet away from the major roundabout. The entire roundabout solution is driven by geometry. It's all about getting the speeds, the deflection angles, and the view angles correct so that you get the right speed, the right interaction, and the good choices from the drivers. So creating that setting is what it's all based on. For these intersections here, the spacing is not as much of an issue, especially at Corral and San Benicio. At those two locations, we're really looking for an operational solution where if you're driving from Salinas toward Corral, go through San Benicio, hit Corral, there's a 2-lane approach. If you want to make a left on Corral, you go around the roundabout and you head up. If you don't want to go and make that left, you just stay straight and cruise on back down the highway. Creating that really unimpeded left turn gives you really exceptional access, and it creates lots of gaps for folks to turn out of Corral and make a right or go into the roundabout and make a left. It's very, very cooperative. The gap for entering the roundabout is short. And what I mean by a gap is the distance between two cars coming toward you from the conflict. Let's say I'm in a roundabout and I'm looking to the left. There's two cars coming at me, and I need a gap that's about this big to fit in between them as I go into the roundabout. Well, with a traffic signal, the speeds are far higher, so the gap is much, much longer. I have to have a much larger acceptable gap to make that turn. Or I have to have full control by the signal and stop everybody else before I make a left turn. Every signal, Whenever I have a left turn, that's just about the only movement that can go through the intersection is that left turn. It's very, very, it just consumes so much more of the time, it's not very efficient. So, the spacing is not as much of a problem. But I will follow on to where we will have spacing concerns, because I want you to understand very clearly where we have some limitations. At Laurelis Grade, we've got the fire station on the corner, and just to the west of that fire station is this little road called Seca Place. Now, I want to beat up on the planner, whoever let that access thing go right there, but we're stuck with it. So I had to find a way to make this roundabout work and not completely close off Seca Place, which will be very challenging. I don't have the solution for that. So there are some spacing things that are going to be challenging. There's another one at, what's the one with the two houses? That San Venancio, opposite the bridge? Yeah, San Venancio has these two beautiful homes, you know, on the monument side of Highway 68. I'd like to take a bulldozer and just go right through all those. But they're there, and I have to figure out a way to get that thing to work. If I can't get that geometry to work, we probably won't build that signal or that roundabout. We'll probably find a signal solution. Again, we're not trying to force something to work. We want to have better control of the intersection. So whichever one works better is better. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm convinced. I live on 68. So my question is, you think construction might start, say, in 2020. Have you got any sort of construction plan? Will you start from the Monterey end and build them sequentially? Are you going to build multiple roundabouts at the same time? Will most of the work be done at night? I mean, what's the plan for construction?
So was everybody around? Everybody drive through the Holman Highway intersection when we were building it? Yeah, okay. Was it horrible?
It was perfect.
It was perfect. See, wasn't it great? Why was it great? Because I closed ramps and I did all kinds of crazy things with traffic. The reason it was great is because we had Grant doing the outreach, and we told everybody before we started, it's going to take me a year. There's going to be 3 periods where I have to do something really hard and divert people and do horrible detours. One nighttime detour, I think we sent people to Big Sur. At least that's what it felt like to some people. But we let everybody know what was coming so they could plan and either avoid it or have enough time to deal with it. And we confined those time periods to short periods that would, number one, it would make it easier for you to plan, so you would go, okay, it's only for a week. Or it would save an enormous amount of construction time instead of spreading it out over a month or 2. We're going to do the same thing with this. We're going to make those signals run well for most of the time. And then where there's a deep impact, we'll try and keep it to the shortest amount of time possible. We'll use night work. We can do double shifts, all kinds of things, and keep those detours, you know, as short as possible and let people know what's coming. Because if you have the information and you know what's going to happen, it makes it easier to adjust and do life a little more successfully. So the same thing's going to happen here. We probably are not going to build them one at a time in a sequence where we have construction for 10 years. We're going to take a grouping of them, probably 3 at a time, and we'll work with staging the traffic control so it makes sense and it has the least impact for the most number of people. And we'll make things run the best way we can. We will most likely be doing a lot of night work when it comes to shutting down one side of the road or the other side, because we want to make sure we can get the work done in a really high quality manner. So the most area we have for paving, we try and do that. But at the same time, we don't want to shut the road down. So that's our plan of attack. Which 3 we'll do first or second really is going to depend on who's suing us. So we'll be able to start sooner if we are able to get through the lawsuits quicker.
Signage seems to be a question too, because when you're a destination, the locals will know how to navigate through, but the people who are visiting will not know which turn, and I know GPS is going to tell you first, second, or third turn. A lot of times it just confuses people. So do you have an answer for that, or is that under study?
Yes, that's a really good point. There were 4 major things when we did our first roundabout here that were huge. They were design showstoppers for me. And having good guide signing was up there in the top 4. So we actually looked at what does the driver need, what's the information they need, and when exactly do they need it, so they can, number one, know what's coming up, what lane to be in, and then when to make that move, whatever it is. And that's what we learned a lot on that project, so that's what we're going to follow. We're going to do the same type of thing to make it simple, make the message consecutive so you can track it easily, and we're going to design it so that you don't need a GPS to drive the roundabout. You'll know. Yeah, right?
I really like the roundabout. I've had a lot of experience with roundabouts, and I think they're sensational. But there is a problem with this one. You may not have been able to deal with it, and that is, it's not a pure spoke system where all roads radiate directly from the center of the intersection. Even though I've had experience, and I know that area very well, it's always sort of problematical. My wife has the same experience. Did you give any attempt to try to make a pure radiating geometry, or you just couldn't do it in that location?
We actually did attempt to do kind of a spoke type of thing, more radial, in 2005 when our first roundabout alternative came through. And it basically failed because the distance between the spokes was so short. When you're in the roundabout, you couldn't tell which leg, the first spoke or the second one, you had to take to get onto the southbound exit ramp. This one had a few other challenges, which was, the right-of-way was, very, very limited. We just shoehorned that thing in there. There was also a 20-foot grade difference between the highway and Pebble Beach down below. There was a queuing distance from the Pebble Beach entry gate up to Highway 68, and we wanted to maximize that length so that queuing wouldn't block the roundabout, and we want to make sure Pebble Beach was able to collect their $10.25 for each person getting in. They had enough time. It was very important. So having that big swooping approach gave me more distance for that queuing, and that's why we had that other thing. Plus, it was through an endangered pine forest. We had drainage into the Pescadero Creek in Pebble Beach and the Majors Creek in Monterey. We had the endangered pine forest. We had the Coastal Commission is in the coastal zone, and it was the only access way for the hospital. So we had a lot of pieces that had to come together, and it was really, really challenging. These, fortunately, don't have nearly that kind of complexity because they're basically right-angle intersections. The one that will be challenging will be San Venancio because I got a bridge that goes right up to the intersection, and I don't want to rebuild the bridge because that'll blow the budget.
I want to say thank you for the really beautiful job you did of putting this one together. I was skeptical.
Thanks.
One of my sons is a local paramedic, and he was deeply concerned because one of his shifts happens to be Big Sur and how he would get there, and it was no more of a problem than it already was. So that's wonderful. So that's my question about the 68 corridor roundabouts. How will the emergency vehicles be able to get through especially if you're doing several at a time?
That's a great question, and it comes up a lot. Before we built a roundabout up here, one of our biggest skeptics was CHP and local fire departments, because there was a fear that there would be so much delay and people wouldn't get out of the way and other sorts of things. Right. Actually, our biggest critic was really the Monterey County Herald, but the fear from CHP was, gosh, we've got AT&T Pro-Am, the US Open, the Concourse weekend. How are we going to have enough officers to control this intersection? And I told them, don't put anybody up there. You don't need anybody because it does it itself. It's self-regulating. And the same thing happens with an emergency vehicle approach. Lights and sirens, you move over to the side. Actually, the most difficult thing is folks to get off the limit line and get into the circle, because there's a big giant truck apron that the fire truck goes over and just goes right around.
Oh, that's what that's for.
Yeah, it's for emergency vehicles and really large trucks. So they just drive right over it, drive right around, and they have fewer side impacts from drivers who are playing their radio too loud and they don't see the fire truck, and then they drive through and they get a T-bone crash. That's the #1 crash for emergency vehicles. It's also faster for ambulances, because ambulances are required to stop at a signal that's red. So they got to stop, make sure it's clear, and then they go. You've seen them slow down. They don't quite, but anyways, the roundabouts actually work a lot better for emergency vehicles, especially because there's no queuing. Yeah.
I've lived in Europe and worked there and have driven a lot in Europe, and I love roundabouts. But I've noticed that in the past 10 years or so, they've started putting signals on them. So have your studies included at what point you might have to put signals on the roundabouts?
That's a great question, too. There are a lot of discussions now with the Transportation Research Board, NDC, and FHWA for signalizing roundabouts, and I actually sit on one of those committees. The issue is, what do you do with ADA access for crossing a roundabout? So blind person in a wheelchair, and you've got a 2-lane approach to a roundabout and a crosswalk. How does that person get across there? And it's a challenging topic because the geometry is different at every single one. It's easy to signal, because at a signal, you go to the corner, you hit the button, and you'll hear the beep, and you walk across. But roundabouts aren't square, and so there's a lot of discussion on that kind of a thing of, do we have a button where we have signals and they stop and allow you to cross? And they're not very close on solutions. There are solutions that work, but they don't work universally yet. There are also high-volume roundabouts where there is major congestion that exceeds the capacity of the roundabout, where agencies have signalized the approach to create gaps in roundabout traffic that clear one direction or another. They tend to be a little peaky also. And then there's also signal solutions for rail lines that go through the center of a roundabout. So you basically stop the approaches and, yeah, put your penny on the track and run back to your car. So,
Well, typically our discussions of traffic are not quite so entertaining as they were today. And I'm sure it's because of our presenters who are both so knowledgeable. And, you know, the Holman Highway Roundabout has received numerous awards. And, you know, in large part it's because Rich was the designer. So we're very fortunate to have had you today, and thank you very much.